Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to Hauntra. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon so that you don't miss any exciting coming up videos. Megan was startled awake by the shrill ring of her phone at 3 a.m. The caller ID displayed unknown number. Hesitant but curious, she answered. A distorted voice whispered, "Come to Black Hollow." Before she could respond, the call ended abruptly. Black Hollow was a ghost village, abandoned decades ago after a series of brutal murders. Despite her fear, Megan felt inexplicably drawn to the place. She shared the event with her skeptical friend, Liam, who insisted on accompanying her. The next night, they drove to the remote location under the pale glow of a full moon. The path to Black Hollow was overgrown, and the air grew colder with each mile. When they arrived, they found a broken sign that read, "Welcome to Black Hollow. Turn back." Ignoring the warning, they ventured into the village. As Megan and Liam stepped onto the cracked cobblestone streets, a thick fog enveloped them, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. The silence was unnerving, broken only by their footsteps. Old, abandoned homes loomed around them, their windows dark and lifeless. The once vibrant town square now lay in ruin, with the remnants of a fountain dry and cracked in the center. A faint, distant whisper seemed to float through the air, but when they looked around, no one was there. They moved cautiously, the hairs on the back of Megan's neck standing up. As they passed the ruins of a collapsed building, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble ever so slightly. An icy chill swept over them, and Megan's breath came out in visible puffs. She suggested they leave, but Liam, ever the skeptic, insisted on exploring further. As they approached an old church, a figure in a tattered cloak appeared at the door. It stood still, watching them intently, before vanishing into the building. The church loomed ahead, its towering steeple cutting through the fog like a jagged knife. The doors creaked open as Megan and Liam hesitantly stepped inside, the air thick with dust and a musty scent. The stained glass windows, shattered and cracked, allowed only dim light to filter in. A cold breeze blew through the open doors, extinguishing their flashlights. As Megan tried to turn them back on, she heard faint footsteps echoing from the pews. She turned, but there was no one there. Liam grabbed her arm, urging her to leave, but as they turned to the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. Panic set in, and the room seemed to darken further. The faint whispers they had heard earlier grew louder, now sounding like disembodied voices. They couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. Megan tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. She heard a low, guttural growl behind her. Megan's heart raced as she turned to face the growl. The darkness behind her seemed to swirl, shifting and twisting like a living thing. Liam grabbed her wrist, pulling her towards the altar, where a faint glow illuminated an ancient book. The growl deepened into a low, continuous hum, vibrating through the stone floors. As they approached the altar, they saw strange symbols carved into the wood, their surfaces blackened as if scorched by fire. Megan felt an unexplainable urge to touch the book despite her growing fear. When her fingers brushed against it, a sharp pain shot through her hand, and the whispers grew louder, now filled with frustration and anger. The temperature dropped drastically, frost forming on the edges of the pews. A shadowy figure materialized behind them, its eyes glowing red with malice. Liam spun around, but the figure disappeared just as quickly. In the silence that followed, Megan heard a soft, distinct voice saying her name. Megan couldn't shake the feeling that the book was calling to her. its pull growing stronger with every passing second. Despite Liam's protests, she pulled the heavy tome from the altar and opened it. The pages were filled with ancient text, written in a language that seemed to crawl and shift before her eyes. As she scanned the pages, her hand trembled, the words burning into her mind. The book detailed the tragic history of Black Hollow, once a thriving village, now a cursed wasteland. It spoke of an entity that had inhabited the village, feeding off the souls of its inhabitants. A ritual had been performed to contain it, but the ritual had failed, and the entity was now free. The more Megan read, the more the room seemed to darken, the walls closing in. Suddenly, the pages began to turn on their own, faster and faster, until they stopped at a final entry. The words, "You have awoken it," were scrawled across the page in blood-red ink. The moment Megan read the last line, the air around them thickened, and the temperature plummeted to freezing. The church seemed to groan, as if the very structure itself was alive. Liam screamed as his breath formed visible clouds, his voice shaky. The ground beneath them cracked, revealing dark, pulsing veins of black energy snaking through the stone. A deafening crash echoed from above, followed by a deep rumbling sound like something massive stirring. Suddenly, a screeching noise rang out from the walls, as if thousands of unseen creatures were clawing at the wood and stone. Megan dropped the book, her hands shaking violently. The shadows in the corners of the church grew darker, coiling and writhing like smoke. Then, from the darkness, a massive, grotesque figure emerged. It was humanoid but distorted. Its skin was stretched and torn, its face a grotesque mask of rage and hunger. Without thinking, Megan and Liam bolted towards the door. But it was no use. The figure lunged at them, its hands outstretched with long, sharp claws. The air around them felt thick, as if the very atmosphere was holding them captive. Liam shoved Megan towards the door, urging her to escape, but the door wouldn't open. In a moment of desperation, Megan grabbed the handle and yanked with all her strength. The door creaked open just as the entity's claws grazed her shoulder, tearing through her jacket. She screamed in pain but pushed forward, pulling Liam along with her. The church's interior seemed to shift, as if the walls were collapsing in on them. They sprinted into the night, but the fog had grown thicker, the air oppressive and suffocating. The shadow followed them, its growl reverberating through the fog like a death knell. They ran blindly, stumbling through the fog, hoping to escape the entity's pursuit. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves at the edge of a dark forest. The trees were twisted and barren, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The ground beneath their feet seemed soft and spongy, as if the earth itself was alive. The figure's growl echoed from the fog, growing louder with each passing second. Megan and Liam dashed into the forest, hoping the dense trees would provide some cover. But the forest was no sanctuary. Every sound was magnified, and the feeling of being watched grew unbearable. The ground seemed to shift beneath their feet, and Megan nearly tripped on a root, but Liam caught her. As they pressed deeper into the forest, they stumbled upon a clearing. In the center was a large stone altar, covered in strange markings that glowed faintly in the dark. Megan's eyes were drawn to the altar, her mind racing with thoughts of the book. She knew it was connected to the entity. As she approached the stone structure, she noticed ancient carvings that mirrored the symbols from the book. The markings seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the air grew colder still. Liam tugged at her arm, urging her to keep moving, but Megan felt compelled to touch the altar. The moment her fingers brushed the cold stone, a blinding flash of light engulfed the clearing. The ground trembled beneath them, and a deafening scream pierced the night. Megan's vision blurred, and for a moment she thought she saw faces, twisted, anguished faces, emerging from the ground. They screamed in agony, reaching out to her with bony hands. A voice whispered in her ear, "Release us." She recoiled in terror, realizing that the entity was not just a monster, it was a curse, one that needed to be broken. Megan knew that in order to survive, she had to end the curse. The book had mentioned a ritual to banish the entity, but it required a sacrifice. A life. The thought made her stomach churn, but there was no other choice. As she turned to Liam, she saw the fear in his eyes. He had always been the skeptic, but now he understood the true horror of Black Hollow. The whispers in the forest grew louder, urging her to make the ultimate decision. The fog thickened around them, closing in on the clearing. Megan's mind raced, but the answer was clear. With a heavy heart, she prepared to perform the ritual. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was the only way to free Black Hollow from the curse. As she began to chant the incantation, the ground shook violently. The entity's growl filled the air, louder than ever. As Megan chanted, the air around them thickened with an unnatural pressure. The fog seemed to coalesce, swirling around the altar like a vortex. The ground beneath their feet cracked open, releasing a putrid stench as dark tendrils slithered from the earth. The entity's growl turned into a roar of rage and it surged forward, its clawed hands reaching for Megan. But she pressed on, her voice steady as the incantation grew louder. Liam stood frozen beside her, eyes wide with terror, but he couldn't tear himself away from the ritual. The dark figure hovered just beyond the altar, its glowing eyes burning with fury. As the final words left Megan's lips, the altar erupted in a blinding flash. The entity let out a screech so deafening that it felt as if her very bones were vibrating. The flash of light faded, and for a moment, everything was eerily still. The fog began to lift, the heavy pressure in the air vanishing. Megan and Liam stood frozen, unsure if the curse had truly been broken. But as the fog cleared, the entity's shadow still lingered in the clearing, its form slowly dissipating like smoke. Megan's heart pounded in her chest, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The village, once silent, now seemed to be alive with whispers, though no one was there. A strange, hollow sound echoed from the distance, like the wind howling through the abandoned streets. But it was more than the wind. It was the voices of the lost souls of Black Hollow, still trapped within the curse. The shadows of the village flickered unnaturally, and Megan realized with a sickening feeling that not all of the entity had been banished. As Megan and Liam attempted to leave the clearing, they found the path had changed. The forest had twisted, its trees now forming a labyrinth of darkness. Each turn they took seemed to lead them further into the heart of Black Hollow. The air grew heavier with every step, the weight of the curse pressing down on them. The whispers had returned, but now they were clearer, more distinct. They spoke of secrets, of things forgotten, of lives lost, and souls bound to the village forever. Megan clutched Liam's arm, but even he seemed to be losing his grip on reality. His eyes were wide with fear, his face pale. The fog thickened again, wrapping them in its suffocating embrace. Every direction they looked, they saw fleeting glimpses of shadows moving just beyond the edges of their vision. They stumbled upon a small clearing at the center of the forest, but it wasn't like the one before. This place felt ancient, as though time had stopped. The ground was covered in dry, cracked earth, and in the middle stood a large stone monolith, inscribed with the same symbols Megan had seen in the book. The air buzzed with dark energy, and as Megan touched the stone, a sudden surge of power coursed through her. She saw flashes of the past, visions of the village before the curse, of the horrible rituals performed by the original inhabitants. The stone was the source of the curse, a conduit for the entity's power. Megan's mind reeled as the visions intensified, showing the horrific sacrifice made to summon the entity in the first place. The villagers had offered their souls in exchange for power, sealing the entity inside the stone. But now, the curse had been fractured, and the entity was no longer bound. Megan and Liam stood before the monolith, the full weight of the situation dawning on them. The fog had cleared enough for them to see the village in the distance, but it was no longer the abandoned town they had arrived in. The buildings were now alive with movement, shadows darting in and out of sight. The voices whispered louder, growing more urgent. The entity's presence was felt once again, stronger than before, as if it were calling out to them. The monolith pulsed with dark energy, sending vibrations through the ground. Megan knew that in order to end the curse for good, she would have to make an impossible decision. The book had warned of a final sacrifice, one life to save all others. She felt the weight of her choice hanging in the air like a thick fog. It was either her or Liam. Megan's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts as she faced the impossible choice. Liam stood beside her, eyes wide with terror but understanding the gravity of the situation. Without speaking, she placed her hand on his shoulder, trying to convey that this was the only way. He shook his head, pleading, but Megan was resolute. She stepped away from him, taking one last look at his face before turning back to the monolith. The whispers in the air grew louder, urging her to complete the ritual. She took a deep breath and placed her hand on the stone once more, feeling the cold, otherworldly energy coursing through her. As she began to chant the final words, the ground shook violently. Liam tried to stop her, but it was too late. A blinding light engulfed her, and in that moment, Megan felt herself being pulled into the monolith. The light faded, and for a moment, everything was still. Liam stood at the edge of the clearing, his heart racing, eyes wide with disbelief. The monolith had absorbed Megan, leaving only the empty stone behind. The fog began to dissipate, and the village slowly fell silent. For the first time since their arrival, the oppressive weight that had hung over Black Hollow lifted. The shadows in the village receded, and the air felt lighter. Liam took a hesitant step forward, calling Megan's name. But there was no answer. The ground beneath him trembled, and suddenly, he was plunged into darkness. He heard Megan's voice, soft and distant, echoing from the depths of the earth. "It's done." Liam wandered through the empty village, his mind numb with grief. Megan was gone, and he was left to face the consequences of her sacrifice. The houses stood like hollow shells, their windows now dark and lifeless. The wind carried a soft whisper through the streets, and Liam realized with a start that the whispers were no longer hostile. They were mournful, sorrowful, like the voices of souls who had found peace. The entity's presence had vanished, but so had Megan. Liam sat down on the stone steps of the church, burying his face in his hands. He had never believed in curses or spirits, but now he knew the truth. Black Hollow was free, but at a great cost. Days later, Liam left Black Hollow, but the village never left him. The air felt lighter, but his heart was heavy with loss. The police never found any trace of Megan, and the village remained eerily silent. Rumors circulated that Black Hollow was cursed, that anyone who entered would never leave. But Liam knew the truth, that the curse had been broken, at least for now. He returned to his life, but the whispers still followed him, reminding him of what had happened. Every night, he would hear Megan's voice, soft and distant, calling out to him. He knew she had made the ultimate sacrifice to save them all, but he also knew that the entity was never truly gone. It was only waiting for the next soul to awaken it. Years passed, but Liam could never escape the memories of that cursed village. He moved far away, but even in the safety of his new life, the whispers still haunted him. Late at night, he would see fleeting glimpses of shadows lurking at the edge of his vision. He knew the curse was not truly gone, that Black Hollow still existed in some twisted form. And as the years wore on, the whispers began to change, growing more insistent. One night, as he stood at his window, he saw the faintest glimmer of light far in the distance. He couldn't explain why, but he knew it was from Black Hollow. And deep down, he understood that the curse was still waiting for someone else to answer its call. Thanks for watching, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for more new videos.